Hello and welcome to my critique of Game of Thrones Season 8. I had originally intended for my next video to be part 1 of my critique of The Walking Dead, however after several requests and the fact I can't stop thinking about this awful season of a once great show, I've decided to postpone the Walking Dead series for a while in order to get this off my chest. I'd like to start off this critique with a little catch-up. First, I had originally planned to do a full critique of Season 5 through 8 of Game of Thrones in that order. However, I've instead decided to tackle Season 8 first. I will eventually go back and do Seasons 5, 6 and 7, and it might be sooner rather than later. As talking about Season 8, coupled with the fact that many other YouTubers and critics are acting as though the writing issues and quality drop for Game of Thrones is a new thing, has really made me want to talk about Seasons 5 through 7. Also, as you may have noticed, this is going to be a long video. Critiquing an entire season of television, even one as truncated as the final season of Game of Thrones, takes an awful lot of time, and this video quickly ballooned into an enormous project. I once made a video solely focusing on the scene in which Littlefinger is killed and it ran 30 minutes. Hopefully that goes some way to explaining why this is so long. As such, I've decided to split this into 3 parts. Part 1 will cover episodes 1 to 3, and Part 2 will cover episodes 4 to 5. And Part 3 will cover episode 6 and examine the characters at the end of the series as compared to where they started, the effectiveness of their arcs, the flaws in the story as a whole in relation to the ending, and I will give a comprehensive breakdown of how I think the season should have gone and how it could have been better, especially with regard to paying off the audience's investment. In this series I will break down each episode scene by scene and explain as best I can what works and what is an abject failure of writing, whilst also covering other aspects of the show such as acting, direction and cinematography when necessary. And it should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway, throughout this series I will be thoroughly spoiling both the final season of Game of Thrones and the 7 seasons that preceded it. If you have not watched the show yet and are worried about spoilers, then I suggest watching this series when you have finished. If you have watched the show or simply don't care about spoilers, then stick around. And without further ado, let's begin the critique.
Have you shot your final scenes yet, and are you happy with how things ended?
Yeah.
She didn't say yes. You didn't say yes.
Best season ever! It's the best. It's the best season ever.
The episode begins with a little boy running to see the arrival of Queen Daenerys and the King of the North, Jon Snow, at Winterfell. This is clearly done to reference Arya running to see the arrival of King Robert Baratheon and Queen Cersei in the pilot episode of the series. Arya even seems to give a knowing glance to the child in acknowledgement of this. And yet, something doesn't quite work here. Despite the inherently brutal nature of feudal-era life, the Winterfell of the first episode is a very different and much more pleasant place to live than the Winterfell of the Season 8 premiere. The series has spanned many years, and this child may have been nothing but a newborn when the story began. As such, his entire life he has known nothing but war and cruel violence. His early years were lived under the destruction of the house of his lord, the Starks, the murderous Theon Greyjoy, where young children were murdered and strung up as a warning in public, and finally the Boltons, who would regularly flay men and women alive. He has also lived through 2 large battles at Winterfell, the first being against Stannis and the second being the Battle of the Bastards. This child's life has been nothing but misery and death, and that has typically come at the arrival of a new king or lord. While it is understandable that children would be excited to see their monarchs arrive at their home, in much the same way people get excited for it today, I find it hard to believe this child would be too excited, given that this is what happened the last time a new monarch arrived to Winterfell. We then see Tyrion and Varys arrive at Winterfell, and Tyrion makes an awkward joke about his balls and the fact that Varys is a eunuch.
But love telling eunuch jokes.
Why is that?
Because I have balls, and you don't.
What have we got here? A fucking comedian.
This one scene is basically Tyrion's character post-season 4 in a nutshell. The bastardization of Tyrion's character is one of the biggest stains on the show. The writers have taken a once cunning and smart character who, much like Littlefinger, was forced to use his intelligence to best his enemies, given his lack of physical strength, and turned him into a running gag. Yes, he was always a funny character, prone to dark humor and rude jokes, but that was never the totality of his character.
Use small words. I'm not as bright as you.
At least not until seasons 5 and 6, where his political cunning was dropped to make way for awkward time-wasting scenes, where he tells jokes to Missandei and Grey Worm. Jon and Daenerys arrive in Winterfell and we see the concerned or downright disgusted looks of the common northerners. Daenerys inexplicably seems to take this personally, as does Missandei and Grey Worm. You would think that any rational and normal person would understand the reluctance of the northerners to accept new foreign rulers. These people's lives have been hell for the better part of a decade, and here comes yet another ruler bringing her massive foreign army. known for their raping and pillaging into their home. It's understandable if they are worried about their children and their homes, especially since it is self-evident that Daenerys and her army are here to stir up even more trouble. Why else would she march her entire army into Winterfell? She clearly plans on a battle or war, and these people are likely to become casualties yet again. Any decent person could forgive them a dirty look or two. But then Drogon and Rhaegal, Dany's dragons, fly over Winterfell and roar menacingly, scaring the frightened and impoverished citizens as Dany smiles. A noble queen must enjoy the simple pleasures after all, burning men that have surrendered to death, screwing her nephew, and enjoy watching the first common people of her new kingdom that she has just met cower in fear of her dragons. Jon is swiftly reunited with Bran. However, despite Kit Harington's best effort, this scene has no emotional weight whatsoever. This is likely due to the fact that Bran is essentially an emotionless robot. It's rather difficult for the audience to feel the desired emotion behind the embrace of two long-separated brothers when one has the emotional range of a toaster oven. Jon then introduces Daenerys to the noble people of Winterfell, including his family. This scene, much like the first one, is designed to mirror the scene in the first episode of the series, when Robert and Cersei arrive at Winterfell, and are greeted by Ned and his family. However, see if you can spot one important difference. In the pilot episode, the people of Winterfell rightly bow to their king, as established as customary throughout the first few seasons. However, in this episode, when Queen Daenerys is introduced to the people, no one bends the knee. This is never acknowledged either. Which is bizarre given that much of Daenerys' story arc this season is based around Sansa and the Northerners not accepting her as queen. Refusing to kneel in the presence of the queen is a pretty noticeable slight, and something she should surely have mentioned given the number of conversations she and Jon have about the North not accepting her. It actually might have made sense that they refused to bend the knee to a foreign queen. Given the sheer size and strength of Daenerys' army plus her dragons, it doesn't really work. However, as far as their characters go, and the inherent distrust the North has for foreign invaders, I could maybe believe that they would refuse, if only initially to bend the knee to the foreign queen. The issue is that it's never directly raised by Daenerys or acknowledged by Sansa or Jon. But here is something even more odd. They don't bend the knee to Jon either. As far as they are concerned, Jon is the king in the North, as decreed by the very people in this scene. And yet they don't even bend the knee to their own acknowledged king. This makes absolutely no sense. The North are willing to bend the knee to Robert Baratheon, king of the Seven Kingdoms, but not to the king of their own kingdom? This seems especially egregious given how honor-bound and dutiful the North has always been portrayed. Given this, and the fact Daenerys never raises the issue, I think it's fair to say this was simply an error on the part of the writers or the director. And it's a shame that such an obvious and glaring flaw was allowed through. People can get worked up about a Starbucks cup or a water bottle making it into the shot all they want, and I certainly will when we get to it. But this seems like a much more glaring error to me. It's especially noticeable given the scene is so clearly designed to mimic the first season premiere, from the children running to see the royal arrival, to the meet and greet with the noblemen of Winterfell. How something like this was missed is frankly baffling. Bran then interrupts the awkward pleasantries by making himself the audience surrogate and loudly proclaiming they don't have time for this. If only he'd been around in the finale when Jon and Tyrion took 30 minutes to silently walk through King's Landing.
We don't have time for all this.
We then get a scene where Jon and Dany meet the Northern lords and ladies. Little Lord Umber is sent back home to collect his men and bring them to Winterfell. And for some reason, Jon allows this child lord to retrieve his men with little to no assistance. He sends a few men with him, but think about this for a moment. Imagine you are on the verge of the most important battle in human history. You need every man you can get, and an army of men is available to you, but they need to travel to get to you. And you know the greatest threat in history is coming towards you. If the Night King reaches the army first, he will kill them and reanimate them to be part of his army. And you just casually send the child back home with minimal support? Who would do that? This is literally life and death. Why not fly on a fucking dragon and guard the men as they get the hell out of there? You could arrive in hours and have them leave immediately. Instead, the child has to head back on horseback. This is all precious time his army might not have. Oh well, I'm sure they'll be fine. I guess Jon had more important things to do. So the living meme Lyanna Mormont asked Jon why he bent the knee to Daenerys when the North declared him king. And I have to ask, if he is your king, why are you yet to bend the knee to him? In fact, why are you talking to him like he's still a common bastard and not your king? So Jon explains that he had a choice: keep his crown or protect the North, and he chose to protect the North. This is understandable from his perspective. However, the Northerners are not pleased. I can somewhat understand why the North would be upset, given that Jon Snow left a king and returned having bent the knee to a foreign queen. However, there is a much bigger issue here that no one seems to bring up. The way Jon and the series has framed this, if Jon had not bent the knee to Daenerys, she would not have come to help fight for the North. So why aren't any of the Northerners questioning why they are now expected to bend the knee to a foreign queen that by her own admission wouldn't have helped save their lives if their king didn't kneel for them? In other words, her place as queen was more important to her than their lives. Which, by the way, I can kind of see her point. If the North won't acknowledge her as queen, why should she fight for them? If they're not her subjects, she has no obligation to help. But it still comes across badly. If she had come to fight for them without expectations, in the hopes of winning the North over, that would be one thing. But her involvement in the war was conditional on Jon surrendering, at least according to Jon, which makes it seem as though she doesn't so much want to break the wheel, but rather simply wants to be the one driving. What's even worse about this is it seemed at the end of Season 7 that Dany had come around to Jon's side, and was willing to fight with him and for the North. And that is when he voluntarily bent the knee. The way this scene played out, it seemed as though he bent the proverbial knee for no reason. She had all but agreed to fight for the North. This is just the beginning of the desecration of the character of Jon Snow in Season 8, and I'll touch on it much more in Part 3, where I will go through the character arcs and resolutions for all of our main characters. But this really is one giant ball of contradictions. It almost seems like this revelation by Jon was designed to keep the North somewhat hostile to Daenerys, to help build to her turn in Episode 5. It's a decent idea in theory, but in practice it just doesn't work, especially when it's been crammed into the space of 5 episodes. Speaking of the desecration of a character, Tyrion joins the conversation and continues to be the antithesis of his former self, now blindly trusting his sister Cersei of all people, something Tyrion would never do. Tyrion explains that the Lannister army is riding north to fight the dead, and I still can't help but wonder why they are riding north to meet the army of the dead, instead of heading south and using something like Moat Cailin to fight the army with a natural advantage. Now that the Boltons and the Freys are all dead, the Northern Alliance basically controls all of that land. Hell, you could even use the Twins. These are both landmarks which have been established as damn near impossible to pass without those controlling them allowing you to. I mean, riding north to fight the army instead of staying south where it's safer would be like lining your army up outside the walls of your castle. And who would ever do that? Sansa then asks how they're going to feed the northern armies, the Vale army, Daenerys' army, and now the Lannister army. This is going to be especially difficult given that it's winter, and Dany has 2 full-grown dragons eating food at an alarming rate. I was actually pleasantly surprised when the writers brought this up in this episode. It was a refreshing change of pace for there to be real-world problems for our characters to have to overcome. That's something which has long since disappeared from the show. And yet this is never brought up again in the entire season. I suppose the writers didn't actually have an answer to the issue, so it was swiftly ignored. It's a shame. I remember when this series employed character-based reasoning for their characters to escape or overcome problems. Now, they are ignored. Out of sight, out of mind, I suppose. But it makes you wonder why they even brought it up in the first place. It was likely just to stir tension between Dany and Sansa. Sansa then mentions the dragons and asks what they eat, to which Daenerys responds, whatever they want. Yeah, that's a great tactic to take, Dany. You were essentially a foreign invader in a land ravaged by war, and you have now brought 2 dragons there. 2 beasts long thought extinct. They have already terrified the locals, and now you assuage their fears by calmly, borderline sociopathically claiming they will eat whatever they want. You could have just said sheep, you fucking asshole. Tyrion and Sansa then have a private conversation and reflect on their marriage. Tyrion wonders what would have happened if they had stayed married. And I hate to get bogged down in the details, but what do you mean, stayed married? Since when were the 2 of you divorced? The High Septon never annulled your marriage. You were married in front of gods and men, and then Sansa ran away, seemingly forgot she was married Ramsay Bolton, and then she killed him. She is a widow to a man she should never have been married to, because she was already married to you. You are still married. Yours is the official marriage. This is a feudal system. Do you think running away from your husband means you are no longer married? Why is this series punishing me for thinking? Tyrion then says everyone that has underestimated Sansa is now dead. Like who, exactly? Littlefinger? Sure, except he was training her, or at least was planning to. until the writers decided he would marry her off to Ramsay Bolton in season 5 for no reason. Nothing about that makes sense. Littlefinger was in love with Sansa. Why would he marry her off to someone else? Anyway, yes, Littlefinger. I suppose he underestimated her. I mean, did he? He saw what she was capable of in season 4 when she lied for him about Lysa's death. But okay, let's say he underestimated her. And she had him executed with little to no proof of any of the crimes she accused him of. Then there's Ramsay Bolton. She was only able to kill him because Littlefinger sent in the Vale Army to save the day for the North. She had very little to do with it. Then there's Joffrey. She was an unwitting participant in his death. She had no idea the plot to kill him even existed, and again, it was Littlefinger who orchestrated it with Olenna Tyrell. Other than that, who is there? Cersei? She's still alive. This statement by Tyrion makes absolutely no sense. Hell, even if you count Littlefinger, she still cheated. She killed him with no proof. She only knew what he had done because of Bran's powers. And she didn't even swing the proverbial sword, she let Arya do it for her. Tyrion, can you stop speaking this utter nonsense and start saying smart things again, please?
I used to think you were the cleverest man alive.
We then see the reunion of Arya and Jon, and this is actually a nice moment. There's a callback to their scene in season 1, which may be a bit of corny fan service, but it was nicely done. She shows him that she still has Needle, and he asks if she's had to use it, which she says she has. I think this could have been conveyed visually rather than spoken literally. I can't believe I'm going to say this, given this is a show that is usually in desperate need of more dialogue and less silence, especially in episode 6.
We don't have time for all this.
But instead of saying all of this, Arya could have just shown him Needle, and Jon could have noticed a bit of staining at the tip from the blood of those she stabbed or something. It's also a shame that the horrors of her story haven't been properly conveyed to Jon. She was a child of 10 when the story began, and in the following 8 years or so, she has travelled across 2 continents, killed dozens of men, been attacked and nearly killed, and lived through the murder of her family and the destruction of her house. Despite how much the show tries to dress her up as a badass assassin, Arya's story is a tragedy. A little girl that has had to endure far more and grow up far quicker than any child should have to. I wish the show had better shown Jon's realization of what she's been through and how different she is now. They then talk about family, and Arya says Sansa is the smartest person she's ever met. Really? The smartest person you've ever met? Smarter than Tyrion. Smarter than Jack and Hagar. Smarter than Littlefinger. You even spent time with Tywin, you little shit. What has Sansa done that's so smart exactly? Outwit Littlefinger? It's kind of cheating when you have the personification of Google next to you. I really wish the writers would quit forcing things like this. We then see the Golden Company arrive in King's Landing, led by Harry Strickland. I read an interview where the actor who plays Strickland, Mark Rissman, said on playing the character, "I did some research into who this person was, where he comes from, and the books are quite precise. And then you see in the scripts what is there, what are the similarities, what are the differences. So I did a bit of research on that, especially since this world was so properly thought through." We only get a couple of lines from Strickland in the first episode, but I'm sure he'll be fully fleshed out by the end of the season. I'm sure his inclusion in the story won't be one big waste of time. Euron has a conversation with Yara for no real reason other than to remind the audience these characters still exist. It seems that despite being tied up here, she is in otherwise good health, which makes sense. After all, Euron does seem like the type of person to look after his prisoners. However, I do have a couple of logical questions. Firstly, why is she still alive? Why wouldn't Euron just kill her? She and Theon fled from the Iron Islands after Euron was elected king because they were afraid he would kill them, and that was established as his plan. So why would he just keep her captive now? You might think he'd want her as a hostage, but what good is Yara Greyjoy as a hostage? Her father is dead, and her brother has nothing to barter with for her return. Keeping her alive makes absolutely zero logical sense from Euron's perspective. And if he kept her alive just to torture her, why does she appear to be in such good health? It's later established in the season that Daenerys going just a few days without food has withered and weakened her. But Yara seems comparably healthy. So it would seem that Euron has been looking after her. My guess is that no one could be bothered to make this scene or the storyline with Yara make sense. We are firmly in wrap this shit up mode at this point in the show. Euron also says they are the last of the Greyjoys, at least the last with any balls. I guess Euron forgot about his own brother Aeron. It's not like he did anything important and crowned you king personally or anything. At least Victarion was spared the indignity of appearing on this show. Euron also mentions his crew are full of mutes. Okay, that's weird. Does he mean he cut their tongues out? Or does he literally just mean they all can't speak naturally? Because how the hell would you find enough men on the Iron Islands that are naturally mute in order to man your ship? You might be thinking that Euron got those men before coming to the Iron Islands, but it was established that Yara and Theon and their supporters stole the Iron Fleet from Euron in Season 6 as he was being crowned king. That's why he was forced to build an entire new fleet, and that's why they all look fancy and new. But don't worry, we'll come back to this in just a moment. So Euron seduces Cersei, and afterwards tells her he's going to put a baby in her. Which begs the question, shouldn't she be showing by now? She's been pregnant since Season 6. Think about everything that has happened since then. Euron has sailed to Essos and back. Jaime has travelled to Highgarden and back to King's Landing and then to Winterfell. She should be 6 months along by now, surely. And yet not only is she not showing, but Euron wasn't even able to tell she was already pregnant. Plus, she's now drinking again, which she wasn't doing last season because she was pregnant. For a moment I thought this might have been a subtle way of conveying to the audience that she had lost her baby, but later episodes proved this wrong. I should have known subtlety isn't really a thing with this series anymore.
A finger in the bum.
Qyburn then interrupts Bronn's time with some prostitutes to give him a crossbow and ask him to assassinate both Tyrion and Jaime for Cersei. Qyburn says she has a flair for the dramatic, and Bronn knowingly says, "This fucking family." Which is a funny line, until you remember that the crossbow should mean nothing to Bronn. The last time it was used was when Tyrion used it to murder Tywin. It makes sense Cersei would want Tyrion killed with it, as a poetic form of revenge, but it shouldn't mean anything to Bronn, given that he wasn't there when Tyrion used it to kill his father. You may think of criticism like this as splitting hairs or nitpicking, but I prefer to think of it as being precise. This is a billion-dollar franchise with $20 writing. Theon then saves Yara, rescuing her from what is presumably Euron's ship, the Silence, while he is busy with Cersei. Boy, it sure was lucky Theon knew exactly which ship amongst the thousands of ships in the Iron Fleet Yara was being held captive on. Now you might think it is logical to check the Silence first. After all, it stands to reason Euron would be holding her on his own ship. Okay, but how does Theon even know which ship is Euron's? Remember, these ships were built after Theon and Yara left the Iron Islands. You might assume that the Silence already existed, but we never saw it until the Iron Fleet showed up in Season 7, having been built in between Seasons 6 and 7. And given the rest of the fleet looks very similar to Euron's Silence, then he either modelled the new fleet on his old ship, or it was built brand new along with the rest of the fleet. If it's new, then I say again, how the hell did Theon know which was Euron's? Or did he spend all night going from ship to ship until he found her? And if it's old, then it sure was nice of Theon and Yara to leave it for Euron when they stole the rest of the Iron Fleet in Season 6. Either way, this small scene brings up so many problems with the internal logic of the show it's almost funny. Yara then thanks Theon for risking his life to save her by headbutting him, presumably as payback for Theon abandoning her when Euron attacked her fleet in Season 7.
You're welcome, bitch!
Even though Theon had literally no way of saving her. He was unarmed, and Euron was holding a knife to Yara's throat, having just murdered several skilled fighters. Yara and Theon sail away from King's Landing, and Yara says they can take the Iron Islands back since Euron is distracted in King's Landing. And what do you mean you can take back the Iron Islands? Okay, so Euron has the Iron Fleet in King's Landing. And what do you think he's going to do when he hears his own seat of power, the kingdom he is the ruler of, has been taken over by his niece and nephew? Why wouldn't he just sail straight back to the Iron Islands and take them back? And if you're counting on him being distracted by the war with Daenerys, remember this is before the Long Night has even happened. At this point in the story, the Living could lose that war. And do you really think Euron hasn't left a garrison behind? Do you think he hasn't left a number of men behind to protect the Iron Islands while he is away? Or do you really think he has left them completely unguarded? And even if, by some miracle, he has been stupid enough to leave them unguarded, what makes you so certain you can just take them back from the people living there? Remember, the Lords held an election and chose Euron as king. They chose Euron over you. What makes you think they'll just welcome you back in as ruler with open arms? This is the laziest type of writing there is. It's the "we said it happened so it just happened" kind of writing. Or the "shut up, don't think about it" kind. Well, maybe that's fine for some people, but I can't help but notice these things. Theon says he wants to go and fight for the Starks at Winterfell, and Yara says she will take the Iron Islands in Daenerys' name, so if she is unable to fight off the dead, she has somewhere to go that Daenerys can't. There's a point. If the Night King wants Bran, why not take him to the Iron Islands? He can't bring his army with him, and will be forced to do it himself. Then he'll be exposed, and you can kill him. Oh wait, never mind, he's a retard. But we'll get to that. So Theon is going to fight for the living, and Yara is going to hide on the Iron Islands? Didn't you just headbutt Theon for being a coward? So what does that make you? And if she does decide to take the Iron Islands, and then go and fight for the living at Winterfell, how will she hold the Iron Islands while she's away? With a group of troops designed to stay behind and defend the islands in your stead? You know, like Euron would have left behind? Back at Winterfell, and Tyrion remarks that the Karstark sigil of the Black Sun is better than Sir Davos' sigil of the Onion, to which Davos agrees. And sure, the Black Sun is better, if you ignore the how and why the Onion became the sigil of the Onion Knight. You know, how Davos went from a simple smuggler to a knight by smuggling onions into Storm's End during the siege of the castle, which kept Stannis Baratheon and his family alive, which led to the forming of his house, and the use of the onion as a symbol of the honor he had earned. Sure, the Black Sun is better. Dany then complains to Jon that Sansa doesn't respect her, despite the fact that Dany has done nothing to earn respect other than arrive in Winterfell. Also, she doesn't seem to have a problem with everyone disrespecting her by not kneeling earlier, so this dialogue seems a bit odd now. She tells Jon that her dragons are barely eating, and they then proceed to waste the dragon's energy by flying them around the north. Hey, maybe you could have flown them to help Little Lord Umber earlier. Jon struggles to get on Rhaegal, and Dany starts to show some personality again, by poking fun at Jon. The love story between the two is one of the most forced and shoehorned in recent history, but this was a decent moment between the two. And credit where credit is due, the scene of the two flying over the snow-covered mountains and trees is visually stunning. It seems like a whole lot of effort for little payoff, when the time and money could have been better suited to building a better story, especially with regard to episode 3 onwards. But, as I say, credit where credit is due. The effects department and cinematographer did an excellent job here. Still, for a show with as big a budget as Game of Thrones, I'd expect excellent visuals. It's the writing that really lets the series down. And given the blank check HBO were willing to write the creators of this series, we really should be able to expect better writing as well. Especially given the creators took 2 years to write this final season. How embarrassing.
If you could describe the season finale of Game of Thrones in one word, how would you describe it?
Disappointing.
Episode 2 begins with Jaime being questioned by Sansa, Jon, and Daenerys. Jaime claims to have come to fight for the living. Daenerys quickly points out the most important issue, that Jaime killed her father, as if that currently matters at all. If it were a matter of trust, I could understand her concern. If Jaime simply hated Targaryens and that's why he killed her father, then sure, I'd bring it up too. Actually, no. I'd try and convict him of the murder of my father, and then execute him. But Daenerys knows why Jaime killed her father. He was known as the Mad King after all. Jaime killed the Mad King to save the population of King's Landing. So what exactly is the issue? They have all been expecting the arrival of the Lannister army to help fight in the war with the dead. So for all they know, Jaime has brought the army with him, camped them outside the walls of Winterfell, and come in to make sure their agreement is still on. After both Tyrion and Brienne vouch for Jaime, Daenerys allows him to live and fight with them against the Night King and his army. And this would mean a lot more if Jaime's part in the battle amounted to anything. Jaime then reveals that Cersei and the Lannister army isn't coming, and that Cersei has decided to be the only semi-smart person in Westeros and stay south and wait for the North to fight the dead, and then do battle with whatever remains. The villain for the second half of this season is smarter than all the heroes combined. You know, it makes it rather hard to root for our heroes when they all act like morons. The army of the dead tends to move pretty slow. They've been marching south since Season 2 and have only just breached the wall. You could have been marching south since you recaptured Winterfell in Season 6. The more space between you and the army of the dead, the better your chances. The issue with stupid heroes is especially true of Tyrion in this season, and in the previous 3 seasons for that matter. He has nothing to do but recommend stupidity to Daenerys. He of all people should have known that Cersei couldn't be trusted. He of all people should have known there was no chance for Cersei to take her army north and fight a battle alongside her enemies. When Jaime was surprised by her choice last season, it at least made a certain kind of sense, as Jaime has always wanted to see the good in Cersei, but for Tyrion to fall for it makes absolutely no sense. Sansa claims that Jaime can't be trusted, having killed Stark soldiers in the past. Jaime refuses to apologize for his actions during war, which I actually appreciated, and was one of the only instances in recent memory of the writers staying true to their characters. Jaime has never been apologetic for his actions, nor should he. As the series has repeatedly shown, he is one of the most misunderstood people in Westeros. Bran then says, "the things we do for love," referencing Jaime's words before pushing him from the window in episode 1. And this line actually annoyed me because it's a half measure. What sense does it make for Bran to mention this line? All it accomplishes is to worry Jaime, and it could have led the others to question what he meant, which could have led to the revelation getting out. This would have instantly led Jon and Sansa to execute Jaime, and you might think that Bran wants Jaime dead, or to worry that he could reveal the truth at any moment, but he doesn't. When Jaime later apologizes, Bran doesn't even consider it an issue worth discussing, as he rightly believes there are bigger issues to worry about. So again, I ask, what was the point in Bran bringing it up? The reason I call it a half measure is the line itself doesn't really accomplish anything, other than have the audience wondering if Bran is going to reveal what Jaime did to him. He might as well be saying this directly to the audience. It's just a tease with no payoff. If you're going to have Bran say the line, let's not be coy about it. Just have Jaime bring it up, atone for his sins, and have Bran defend him. Sure, Jon and Sansa would likely want to kill Jaime, but if Brienne, Tyrion, and most importantly Bran defended him, I think they could see reason. It could also be a great scene for Jaime. If he were to break down and essentially confess his sins and ask for forgiveness to Bran for his actions in his past life, it could make for a brilliant moment for Nikolai Coster-Waldau, reminiscent of the "I abandoned my child" scene from There Will Be Blood. The half measure of just saying "the things I do for love" adds nothing of substance. The full measure of a proper Jaime confession would give us a potentially brilliant scene. And you might think this is a contradiction, given I earlier said that Jaime rightly didn't apologize for his actions during war. But it's not. There's a difference between killing the Mad King to save 500,000 lives, and throwing a little boy from a window to keep his incest a secret. My point with this line is this: either go all the way with it, or cut the line out entirely. Don't waste my time teasing revelations when we're in the closing stretch of the series. Now is the time for revelations. Let me use a recent example to quickly illustrate my point. I have my criticisms of the final 8 episodes of Breaking Bad, and one day I'll do a video explaining them. Regardless, it's still a pretty decent ending to a brilliant show. And even though I think the episode Ozymandias is overrated, and not close to the series' best episode, I mention it for a reason. Could you imagine if instead of Walt telling Jesse that he watched Jane die, he simply said Jane's name and nothing more? It would rob the scene of the gut punch it delivers. Vince Gilligan knew that fans wanted Jesse to discover Walt's hand in Jane's death. The series has been teasing it for years, and it makes sense to tease it in Season 3. Halfway through your story is when you tease things for later. The ending is when it's time for the payoff. This is something Episode 3 of this season could have learned too. Dany then criticizes Tyrion for trusting Cersei, and ultimately allows Jaime to live. I'll get into a proper breakdown of the repeated character assassinations of Tyrion and others in Part 3, but it can't be stated enough just how much damage has been done to Tyrion in the second half of this show. The Tyrion of Season 8 is almost nothing like the Tyrion of Season 1. Even the drunken, whoring Tyrion never would have been stupid enough to trust Cersei to do anything that wasn't in her immediate self-interest. There is a reason even the most die-hard fans of this show have been criticizing this season, and it's because of awful writing like that. We then get a scene with Arya and Gendry, and despite seeing the last of the Dragonglass wagons arriving in the previous episode, we see more arrive in this episode.
Are these the last of the wagons?
Consistency? What's that? Gendry says she'll be safer in the crypts, which is where the people who aren't fighting are going to hide, because apparently everyone forgot the Night King can literally raise the dead to join his army. Hiding with the dead bodies might be the dumbest thing they could do. Isn't there a wine cellar they could hide in or something? How is the crypt even going to keep them safe, given that Sam was able to trip over and stumble across Jon in the crypts with little effort in the last episode? Arya asks him what the dead are like because she hasn't seen them yet. This makes sense as she's been off wandering around the Riverlands and across the Narrow Sea in Braavos for the entire show. In fact, she's only just learned that the dead have risen and are marching towards them. She only just learned of the Night King, the White Walkers, and the entire army of the dead. I sure hope they don't have her be the one to wrap the entire story up. Gendry tells her the dead are like death, showing that his creative ability is on par with the writers of this season. We also see Arya throw some knives, and while I'll touch on this in much greater detail in my Season 7 critique, I have to bring this up here just briefly. Arya's skills are one of the most ill-defined and poorly explained aspects of the show post-Season 6. In fact, the audience seems somewhat split on this, but even fans that are critical of the series have largely overlooked this. In episode 3, when Arya kills the Night King, many people asked how was she able to do this, and the prevailing answer appeared to be because she trained for several years with the Faceless Men to become an assassin. And my response is always, did she? Sure, she was with the Faceless Men for a couple of years, but what training did she do exactly? She swept the floor, cleaned bodies, and learned how to fight with a staff while blind. Useful skills to be sure, but is that all it takes to be a master assassin? When did we see Arya learn how to fight with a knife? Or how about learn to throw knives with pinpoint accuracy? This is one of my biggest issues with Arya, her skills and her time with the Faceless Men. Not only was her time there a complete letdown, but we barely saw her learn anything. It seemed to me like the writers had no idea what was actually going to happen to her when she arrived, and all they could come up with was 2 seasons of dull training that gave very little practical skills. It's not like I don't buy that a little girl or a young woman could be an assassin. I just need to see her skills be commensurate with her training. I don't buy her abilities in seasons 7 and 8, given the training we see her receive in seasons 5 and 6. It would be like if you hit the gym for a couple years, and then all of a sudden, you had the same wrestling skills as GSP. We then see a nice scene where Jaime apologizes to Bran, and he then volunteers to serve under Brienne's command on the battlefield, which seems nice in theory, but given the way the battle goes, Brienne doesn't really command much of anything. Still, the scenes between Jaime and Brienne are usually pretty good, as is this one. All we need is for Jaime to save Brienne during the Battle of Winterfell next episode, and their story will come full circle. Jorah then vouches for Tyrion to Dany, defending his mistakes and praising his intelligence, and honestly this scene makes little sense. It comes off more like the writers trying to justify Tyrion's stupidity to the audience than it does a scene between Jorah and Dany. Jorah has shown little more than contempt for Tyrion up to this point, and as Dany points out, the only reason Jorah is not her hand is because Tyrion is. Seeing someone defend Tyrion's intelligence is also laughable at this point in the story, as Tyrion hasn't acted like an intelligent person for the better part of 4 seasons. Outside of the odd scene here and there, Tyrion has been largely a complete idiot. I like the concept the show toys with, that Tyrion might be subconsciously sabotaging Dany in order to save his family. Suffice to say, Tyrion is not a smart man at this point, and no amount of scenes featuring characters trying to claim he is will convince me otherwise. If the writers want me to believe he is an intelligent man, then show me scenes of him using his cunning, wit, and brain to formulate a plan that makes sense. Show me Tyrion being intelligent, and then maybe I'll believe you. Show, don't tell. This is writing 101. We then see a conversation between Sansa and Daenerys in an attempt by Dany to get Sansa to warm up to her. It makes sense from a diplomatic standpoint for Dany to try this, and I can appreciate an attempt by the writers of the episode to try and bring back some of the political diplomacy and scheming that the series built itself on in the first few seasons. Sansa agrees with Dany that Tyrion was foolish to trust Cersei, but says that Dany was foolish to trust her too. And while this is true to a certain extent, I'm actually going to defend Dany here. Dany was trusting her advisor, Tyrion, with his counsel about Cersei, and took him at face value that he understood his sister. This makes sense, especially given she had not met Cersei prior to the meeting in the Dragon Pit in the 7th season finale. Sure, Cersei was hostile in the meeting, but she was staring down the barrel of 2 wars, so a certain level of hostility towards the people she will likely be fighting against soon is understandable, especially when the leader of her enemies has 2 armies of skilled fighters and 2 fully grown dragons. So Dany trusting that Tyrion knew his sister better than she did makes sense. It's Tyrion trusting Cersei that's truly stupid here. Sansa should be criticizing him, or more importantly, the writers that were stupid enough to write that nonsense. Sansa says that Dany is manipulating Jon, and Dany counters that she has brought her entire army to Winterfell to defend the North, and that she is the one being manipulated. The truth here is that neither of them are being manipulated. Jon bent the knee to Daenerys for no reason, because he's a moron now, and Dany is doing what all leaders should do, and protecting her subjects from an invading threat. Daenerys is going to sit on the Iron Throne, that much is certain. Her armies are too large and powerful for any of the 7 kingdoms to defend against. And she has 2 grown dragons. Dany will be queen in short order, so it stands to reason she would use her power to defend her people. What doesn't make sense is why she hasn't taken the Iron Throne already. It has been her singular mission since the 1st season, and while she has a new mission now to defend the North and protect the living from the dead, why not take the Iron Throne first? Dany could leave Winterfell at this very moment, fly to King's Landing, kill Cersei, and take the Iron Throne. From there, she would control the Lannister army and call all of the Lords of the 7 Kingdoms to either march their armies south to keep them safe and form a last line of defense against the dead, or to march their armies north to fight the dead head on. Either way, with Cersei gone and Dany sitting firmly on the Iron Throne, the army of the living would have a much better chance against the dead. Jon and Dany aren't being manipulated here. The only ones doing the manipulating here are the writers trying to make us buy into all this nonsense. Dany says Jon and Khal Drogo were the only men that were true to their word. What about Ser Barristan Selmy? What about Grey Worm? What about Jon Royce? What about Daario Naharis? What about all the men that have fought and died in your name, or your family's names? Sansa tells Dany she wants a truly independent North. Okay, fine. If you want an independent North, then you need to fight for it and defend it.
We used to be guerrillas. All we had is what we could take and defend.
This is a feudal era system, where a king or queen rules over his or her kingdoms. It doesn't really count as independence if you're just handed it. I mean, sure, I suppose if the Queen says you can be independent, then you can, but it means much more if you fight and take your independence.
No one gives it to you. You have to take it.
Because if you are capable of that, then it can't be taken away from you. At least not easily. Compare Australia and America, for example. While both countries are technically independent of Britain, America fought for and won its independence, whereas Australia requested and was granted its independence. The difference? Well, Australia is still technically a part of the Commonwealth, much like Canada, and as such, still recognises the Queen as its head of state. America, on the other hand, is truly independent, with its own president. When Robb Stark declared the North independent and was named King in the North, he fought for the North's independence. Sansa just kind of whines and complains, hoping that will get the North its independence. Theon then interrupts and remembers to do what everyone else seemingly forgot, to bow to the Queen. We get a nice reunion between Sansa and Theon, and he says he has come to fight for her. Alfie Allen is pretty much the acting MVP of any scene he is in, and despite some rather dodgy material he's been given over the past few seasons, he always manages to pull something good from it. A little girl then tells Davos she wants to fight in the battle with the dead, and he rightly thinks it's absurd. And yet a little girl actually does fight in the battle, because this show can't keep things straight from one episode to the next anymore.
You serious?
Tormund and Beric tell Jon the Umbers are dead, and instead of saying, "I shouldn't have wasted time flying dragons with Daenerys, I should have helped them," he instead says nothing of importance. Tormund then says the dead will be there before sunrise. How do you know that? Answer me, Ginger. Okay, so maybe he made an educated guess that just happened to be dead on. But let's get this straight. Tormund and Beric were at Eastwatch when the dead breached the wall. To stay ahead of the army of the dead, they likely ran practically non-stop from the wall to the Umbers to Winterfell. You should be exhausted to the point of the brink of death. You are going to be useless in the battle if you only have a few hours of rest before the dead arrive. How does the show explain this? It doesn't bother. And this is never mentioned once, much like the food issue from episode 1. I guess Gendry coached them on running since he's the fastest of all of them. We then see all the main players formulating a battle plan. And for some reason, it just seems to be universally accepted that the armies will be lined up outside the walls of the castle. Why? Why has no one questioned this? In what world would any sane group of people get together and decide to put all of their soldiers outside the walls of the castle? That's what the walls of the castle are for, to protect its occupants against attackers. The only way this would happen is if you were trying to lose the war. Is Varys sabotaging Dany already? That's not supposed to happen until episode 5. Jon says they can't beat the army of the dead in a straight fight. Then why are you lining your armies up outside the walls of the castle? Why is this show punishing me for thinking? Jon says if they kill the Night King, it will kill the army. Okay, so line your army up on the walls of the castle and fire down on the dead as they arrive. Only go outside the walls if absolutely necessary. And Jon and Dany can use the dragons to fly to the back of the army to kill the White Walkers and hopefully the Night King. No, you're not going to do that, are you? Jaime says the Night King won't expose himself, and if this were a logical series still, you'd be absolutely right. From a logical standpoint, there is no reason for the Night King to even stop at Winterfell. What is there to gain? The Night King could just keep on moving while chunks of his army do the work for him. Bran then says the Night King will come for him, to erase the memories of the world that Bran now carries with him. How do you know that? Answer me, Bran the Broken Logic. I know you can see the past and influence the future, but can you read minds too? Wait, if you can influence the future via the past, and you know the exact moment the Night King was created, couldn't you just change it? Hey, don't worry about the battle, everybody. Bran's going to save everyone's lives by using his magical and conveniently undefined powers to travel through time, and prevent the Night King from ever being created. Kind of like how he made Hodor become retarded during the whole hold the door thing. Oh wait, I guess Bran kind of forgot he could do that. Bran then says they should use him as bait to lure the Night King out of hiding. Bran says the mark on his arm tells the Night King where he is, and he will come for it. But how is that going to work when the Night King has a dragon and could kill Bran from a distance with dragonfire? You'll obviously have to take Bran far away from Winterfell, to somewhere more secure like Moat Cailin or the Twins, somewhere where the Night King's army and his dragons will be unable to kill Bran, which will either expose that he doesn't really care about Bran and has other plans, or will force him to kill Bran personally, at which point you can ambush and kill him. Wait, what? You just want to sit in the Godswood and hope the Night King shows up? What if he just roasts you using Viserion? We just shouldn't think about it, I guess. Theon says he and the Ironborn will protect Bran, which is a nice moment, given the past between both characters. Once again, the writers show they are capable of decent callbacks and solid writing when they really put their minds to it, and once again Alfie Allen has the best moment in the scene. Jon says the dragons need to protect Bran, something I'm sure he will remember to do during the actual battle. Arya asks if Dragonfire will kill the Night King, and Bran says he doesn't know, as no one has ever tried. Remember that line, as I will have plenty to say about it when we get to episode 3 later in this video. Grey Worm and Missandei agree to go to Narth after the war is over, and as Preston Jacobs pointed out, this will mean certain death for Grey Worm thanks to the poisonous butterflies that inhabit Narth, and are lethal to newcomers. We then see Sam, Jon, and Ed on the walls of the castle, looking out at the darkness. Ed says their watch has begun, which is a nice sentiment and nod to the history of the characters, and all but guarantees Ed is going to die in the next episode. Ed and Jon crack jokes at Sam's expense, and Sam is forced to defend his fighting ability. This is something that is visually referenced again in the next episode, as Sam is seen crying on the ground during the battle. This is a rather annoying walk back of his character. In fact, this is something that has happened with several characters this season, including Tyrion for much of the last few seasons, and Daenerys in episode 5. Much like the flimsy excuses people made to justify Daenerys' sudden turn in episode 5 as making sense, I'm sure many viewers likely laughed alongside Ed and Jon at the thought of Sam being an effective fighter. After all, Sam is useless and a giant coward, right? Well, no. This is the point of character development. Characters change over time. Sam started out as a giant coward, sure, but he changed gradually into a decent and formidable fighter. Sure, he isn't on Jon's level, and he's no Jorah Mormont, but Sam is no slouch either. He was the first man in thousands of years to kill a White Walker, and he handled himself with courage during the defense of Castle Black, against the wildling invasion in the penultimate episode of Season 4. This is something Jon and Ed should know as they both fought alongside Sam in that battle, and it is certainly something the writers should be aware of. We then get the start of what is easily the best scene in the episode, and perhaps the entire season, although that isn't saying much. Jaime, Tyrion, Brienne, Podrick, Tormund, and Davos have a conversation around a fire, and Tormund tells us an amusing story about the origin of his name. We then cut to Arya having a drink with Beric and the Hound. Nothing of consequence happens here, and I assume it only occurs as a foundation for the reveal that the totality of Beric's story was to save Arya's life, which is silly enough on the face of it, until you realize he has had only a handful of scenes with Arya, and not a single one since Season 3. Arya then gets her custom-made weapon from Gendry, and she learns the true meaning of the phrase, stick them with the pointy end. I've seen several people take issue with Arya's sex scene and nudity, and while I can understand their discomfort with the scene, what's creepy to me is that she has the scene with an actor who was already an adult when he had scenes with her in Season 2 and 3 when she was a preteen. We cut back to the group chat, and Davos says he has no combat ability, which seems ludicrous given that he was in charge of Stannis' fleet during the invasion of King's Landing and the Battle of Blackwater Bay in Season 2. What did he expect to do when the ships reached land? Just stay below deck until the battle was over? We then get the best moment of the episode, as Jaime knights Brienne, making Brienne the first female knight of the Seven Kingdoms. It's a really great moment. The fact that it's Jaime that does it is a nice touch to their relationship, which is sadly ruined just 2 episodes later. But still, For the moment, it was a nice payoff for both Brienne as a character and her relationship with Jaime. I wish Jaime could have read out the entirety of the knighting speech instead of just half of it, but we can't have everything, I guess. Here's how it should have gone, by the way. In the name of the warrior, I charge you to be brave. In the name of the father, I charge you to be just. In the name of the mother, I charge you to defend the young and innocent. In the name of the maid, I charge you to protect all women. Still, slightly off speech aside, it's a great scene and a great moment for a mostly great character. I especially like Jaime's line where he specifically refers to her as a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. The line, the way it was read, and the swelling of music, as well as the performance of Gwendoline Christie, makes the scene the best of the episode, likely the best of the season, and one of the few truly great moments in an otherwise abysmal 6 episodes of television. Lady Mormont then explains to Jorah that she wants to fight in the battle and plans to be on the field alongside her men, rather than hidden away in the crypts. This is absurd, as she is a small child, and completely ill-equipped to fight in a battle of any kind, let alone against an unstoppable horde of undead monsters. Jorah rightly tries to talk her out of it, and her response is to be rude to him. This is something that needs addressing, I think, as many writers in recent years, in what seems like an attempt to portray female characters as strong and independent, end up writing them as unlikable and rude instead. When fans then complain about the quality of the writing and the rudeness of the character, they are typically labelled as sexist or misogynist. I think the issue here is twofold. Firstly, it usually comes down to the incompetent writing. It is not difficult to make a character, female or otherwise, assertive or even dominant while keeping her relatable and likable. Logic is a key factor. If her actions are logical, then the audience is inclined to side with her. Take Ellen Ripley from the Alien series, for example. This is a routinely used example, and for good reason. Ellen Ripley is an excellently written and portrayed character, who maintains a logical personality throughout the series. Portrayal is also an issue, though. If you have a character behaving in a rude, flippant, arrogant, or sarcastic manner, then the actor needs a ton of charisma to offset this. These are not typically pleasant traits in a person and can often be off-putting, and yet if an actor is capable enough, they can make the character endearing or even likable. Take Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of Tony Stark, for example. Fitting, I suppose, given the name. In the hands of a different actor, the character's arrogance and sarcasm may have come off as extremely unlikable to the audience, but Downey's innate charisma made Tony a beloved character. That was a rather long way of saying, this little girl is annoying and illogical, but I think it was worth delving into. Also, it's worth pointing out that given Jorah received a royal pardon for his crimes in Season 3, he is the rightful heir to Bear Island, and should be the Lord instead of Lady Mormont. But why bother mentioning that? It's not like his pardon was a major plot point in the series and for his character or anything. Oh wait, no it was. Sam then gives Jorah his ancestral sword, Heartsbane. Before I delve into this, I just thought it was worth pointing out that Jorah kills precisely 0 White Walkers with this sword, because we can't have nice things. Anyway, this is another nice moment, which would mean even more if it wasn't essentially an exercise in walking back Sam's character development. With all due respect, wouldn't it have been much more rewarding to have seen Sam wielding his family sword on the battlefield against a White Walker? Imagine the visual payoff to the transformation Sam has gone through over the course of the series. The man started the series barely able to hold a sword, and thoroughly unable to defend himself even in combat training. Now, years later, wielding the sword that was by rights his but denied to him by his scornful father. Sam Otali, from scared boy, unworthy of his warrior father's name, to accomplished fighter, fighting in the battle for the living and for the continuation of his family name. Now that is how you pay off a character arc. Instead, he just gives it to Jorah because he's a big old fraidy cat. Yeah, cool. That's way more satisfying. There's even another way this gifting of Heartsbane could have been more impactful, but I have to take you back to Season 7. Last season, when Jon and Jorah were beyond the wall, Jon offered to give his sword Longclaw back to Jorah, as it was given to him by Jorah's father. Jorah respectfully declined. Now instead imagine that when Jon and Jorah returned to the wall, that Jon insisted that Jorah take it back. He could explain that his father once had a family sword, and that he is sure he would want it to be returned to his children, just as he is sure that Jeor would want Longclaw returned to Jorah. Jorah then graciously accepts, and for the first time in years, feels a connection to his family he once thought long lost. Fast forward to this scene, and Sam could have given Heartsbane to Jon, a symbol of the trust and protection Sam has put into Jon over the years they've known each other. As nice as the moment between Sam and Jorah is, I think either one of these two moments would have been better. We are then enchanted by the vocal talents of Podrick, as we see a montage of soldiers prepping for the battle in stupid ways. And then we get the second biggest scene of the season thus far. Jon tells Dany about his lineage. Down in the crypts, Johnny tells Dany about Lyanna Stark, and Dany expresses sadness that her brother Rhaegar kidnapped and raped her. How it is public knowledge that he raped her seems a little strange, given the secrecy surrounding Jon's birth. It's especially odd that Dany would just take it as gospel that her brother, known for his kindness, had raped a woman. This is information espoused by the people that usurped her father and destroyed her family house, so it's odd that she would just assume it's the truth. Still, Jon corrects her, explaining that they were in love, married, and had a son. He then reveals his real name, Aegon Targaryen. Dany doubts his claim. You'd think, given Dany's knowledge of her brother and the events of that time, that the first thing she'd do is question the name Aegon, given that Rhaegar already had a son named Aegon. But instead, she says that would make Jon the last male Targaryen heir and would give him a claim to the Iron Throne. Before they can discuss it further, the alarm sounds to signal the arrival of the dead, and we see the White Walkers and the army just outside the walls of Winterfell. And this is it. This is the last decent moments of the season. I have my criticisms of this episode, and just wrote nearly 6,000 words about it, but this episode is still the high point of the season by a mile. It's all downhill from here.
What it was like reading the last episode for the first time.
Like the different stages you went through.
I mean, it's pretty much one stage.
Okay.
Of just...
Episode 3 opens with a terrified Sam walking through Winterfell. This is completely counter to the man he has become in the arc we have followed his character on through the series. But trust me, I'll get much deeper on this in a moment. We then see Tyrion walking and walking and walking in a brilliant foreshadowing of his role in the finale. We then see the army of the living lined up outside the walls of Winterfell, anticipating a charge by the army of the dead. And already, in the very first scene, I have more issues than I can likely mention. However, I will quickly mention that the visual of all the armies lined up on the front line with many of the characters we have followed across the series, all from vastly different locations and walks of life, coming together in one scene, was impressive. It is colossally dumb, but visually impressive. However, what on earth are they doing outside the walls of the castle? Do none of you know how a castle works? The walls are there to defend the occupants. You're in a defensive position against an invading army. Also, you might have noticed the trebuchets are outside the walls of the castle as well. In what world would anyone, with even a flicker of common sense, put the trebuchets outside the walls of the castle? Are you trying to lose this war? I actually think the writers realized that despite how much they've built the army of the dead up as a threat throughout the show, they aren't actually much of a threat in siege warfare. Our heroes actually have a pretty easy victory ahead of them if they just use their brains, so the writers needed to cripple them with stupidity at every moment in order to make it a fair fight. I'll also briefly touch on this here and then expand on it later. But I could barely make out what was happening throughout parts of this episode due to the abysmal lighting. I like the idea of using natural light and making the battle seem more realistic by not lighting it like a fake TV show, but at times this episode was so dark it drifted into incomprehension. But as I say, we'll get back to that in a moment. So the Dothraki cavalry are out in front of the army, and... sorry, hold on. What do you mean the cavalry are out in front of the army? Do you know what a cavalry is? So Melisandre shows up, and for some reason she rides towards the Dothraki from the other side of the battlefield. Why? How did she get there? Did she arrive in Winterfell, and then go outside the walls, walk out past the army just to dramatically walk back towards them? She's lucky someone didn't immediately kill her for fear she was part of the army of the dead. And speaking of Melisandre, what is she doing here? How did she know to arrive at this moment? Did she see it in the flames? Because those haven't been the most accurate gauge of what's going to happen. And if she did know she needed to be here to help in the battle, it sure is lucky she arrived just in time. Or did she actually arrive weeks ago, and has just been hiding out on the outskirts of Winterfell waiting for her moment? Better yet, what is she actually here to do? She lights the Dothraki's arcs, but that doesn't matter as they all die immediately. She then lights the perimeter fire, but that doesn't matter because the Whites quickly breach it. I suppose you could say she convinces Arya to kill the Night King, and trust me, we'll get into that in a moment. But I highly doubt Arya needed much convincing in that regard. Melisandre basically accomplishes nothing. The one thing she could have done, resurrecting Beric Dondarrion, she doesn't do. And what is she even doing here? Didn't she leave last season to go to Volantis? What did she do there? Did it have any bearing on the events of this episode? It didn't seem to. But we don't actually know. It's never explained. And speaking of her lighting the Arax for the Dothraki, wouldn't that spook them? It's well established in the series that the Dothraki have a great fear of magic and distrust those that practice it. And not only that, but it was Dany and her use of fire that got them to bow to her in the first place. Fire and magic are the two things the series has previously established the Dothraki fear. And here we have Melisandre using magic to create fire to help the Dothraki, and they barely flinch. But what does continuity even matter, right? Melisandre also says Vala Morgulis, or all men must die, to Grey Worm, who responds with Vala Doharis, or all men must serve. Grey Worm is from Meereen and Melisandre is from Volantis, neither one of which is Braavos. It makes no sense for either of them to be speaking Braavosi, especially since neither of them worships the many-faced god. In fact, Melisandre very expressly worships R'hllor. She is even a priestess, and her devotion to the Lord of Light is pivotal to the series, her character, and this episode itself. Funny how just 4 words shared between 2 characters can make such little sense. But the general audience knows the saying, so I guess the writers thought it would be cool to put it in the series before a big battle. Okay, that's the first 30 seconds covered, now let's get to the rest of this dumpster fire. So the Dothraki cavalry charges into the darkness, and hang on, I have to stop there. Fuck, I can barely get a single sentence describing this nonsense out without having to explain how stupid it is. In what world would any sane army send a huge wave of its soldiers out into the darkness where they can't even see their enemies? And why were the horns blown at the end of the last episode to signal the arrival of the dead, when it's established here that it's too dark to see the army? Isn't that a contradiction? If it's too dark to see them, how do you know they're there? In fact, without the lit Arax, they wouldn't have been able to see anything. Kind of like the audience with the rest of this episode. What if the army of the dead had dug a massive ditch in the ground and filled it with spikes as a trap for the opposing soldiers that made it that far out into the battlefield? They would have all ridden their horses right into the hole and died. Why wouldn't they just wait until the enemy came to them? Well, there are 2 reasons. The first is that the writers realized that if our heroes actually had 2 brain cells to rub together, they would have used the castle walls to their advantage and attempted to engage in siege warfare. And they probably would have won that fight very quickly. That's why the army was lined up outside the walls of the castle, to give them a weakness to make the battle almost impossible to win, to give the episode some tension. That's not to say that a logical defense of the castle from within and atop the walls wouldn't have been tense and exciting. I think it could have been, and in fact was, in the Season 4 episode The Watchers on the Wall, where Mance Rayder's wildling army attacked Castle Black. I just think the writers either didn't care to, or were intellectually incapable of taking the time to write the battle in a logical, and simultaneously exciting and tense way. It's much easier to just put the entire army in the field than to carefully plot out logical battle plans. The second reason is to create a simple way to effectively wipe out the Dothraki from the story. If it hasn't been clear to you, Benioff and Weiss have been desperately trying to clear the board of players in the game for several seasons, and as such have been haphazardly killing off characters in increasingly unsatisfying and ridiculous ways. Were you curious as to Roose Bolton's plans? Well, don't worry, he's just been killed in the most obvious and intelligence-insulting way imaginable. Were you excited to see how Stannis the Manus' story plays out? Well, forget about it, because we butchered his character and killed him off. And we didn't even let you see it, we just cut away. Speaking of cutting away, this episode was littered with the worst kind of cop-out writing imaginable, the cutaway. Every time one of our heroes was overrun by whites and all hope seemed lost, the episode just cut away to something else, and when we cut back, the hero in question is fine. We repeatedly see characters such as Brienne, Jaime, and Sam overrun and smothered by whites. They are surely dead when the director cuts away, and when we cut back, they are fine. This is intelligence insulting to a ridiculous degree. It's the textbook definition of plot armor. It's not time for these characters to die, so they just don't, even if logically they should all be dead. There is a simple way around this. Just don't write them into this situation in the first place. It's also absurd that these characters have armor that seems to hold up brilliantly, given they don't suffer a single stab wound. And yet later in the episode, armor is just about useless for Theon, Jorah, and Beric. We get a scene where Brienne is swarmed by the dead. She is covered and screams in fear and pain. And then Jaime hits one of them and they all die. Because who even cares anymore, right guys? Jaime saving Brienne is a nice moment, and it brings their story full circle, as Brienne has repeatedly saved Jaime's life, and he has now returned the favour. It's a nice moment utterly ruined by the stupidity of the scene. If this was still the Game of Thrones of the first 4 seasons, Brienne would be dead. But it's not, and thus she is fine. For reference, Sam is taken down and nearly killed by just one white, just moments later. Which is even dumber when you take into account that he too is swarmed later, and they use the old cutaway trick to explain away the fact that he is unharmed by the ordeal. So the Dothraki stupidly charge headfirst into the darkness and are quickly killed off in one fell swoop. And yes, seeing the flames of the Araks all go out was a nice shot. It was an impressive visual in a series filled with impressive visuals. But the problem with impressive visuals is, they don't mean a whole lot when that's all you've got. There are plenty of films and series that look amazing but are saddled with bad writing. A grand visual shouldn't be enough to ignore terrible writing. I wish more people would be willing to demand better from the entertainment they consume. Yes, visuals are important, but they are no substitute for good writing, and rather the two should go hand in hand, and should be expected to do so by the paying audience. Basically what I mean is, don't settle for crap just because it looks good. So the Dothraki are dead. Or not, actually. There are a few still alive, and look, there's another one. So at least a few dozen survived, I guess, though they will likely be picked off later in the battle. I'm sure it won't be laughably claimed in the next episode that half of them survived, when the point of this visual, that received so much praise, was to convey that they were nearly all killed. This is literally what's claimed in the next episode. The Dothraki have been killed, and the Unsullied are being overrun. A retreat is called because the army is being slaughtered because the plan was stupid from the get-go. The army of the living needs to ignite the fire perimeter surrounding Winterfell to keep the army of the dead at bay. Cool. Why didn't you do that from the beginning? The flame arrows being shot at the perimeter are being put out by the cold weather that the Night King has brought with him. Wait, you have fire arrows? Fire them at the army of the dead, you idiots! Their two weaknesses are dragonglass and fire. Shoot the fire at them! All hope seems lost until Melisandre comes out to light the fire using the power of the Lord of Light. And could you move a little faster, love? This is literally the battle between life and death, and life is losing. The enemy of the god you worship, the Great Other, is here, and is about to win. Could you not move your ass a little? So Melisandre struggles to light the fire, and just as a white is about to jump across and kill her, she gets it going. Remember when this show subverted cliches? Now it just subverts good writing. The fire perimeter is lit, and our heroes are saved. Except a few whites stack themselves up on the fire, and they enable the rest of the army to cross. Hold on. It's been established that fire not only kills whites, but it's like a lit match to gasoline. And yet after seasons of establishing this, after establishing it in the very last episode that the fire kills and quickly spreads on whites, the series abandons this to shoehorn in more tension and despair. I get that the writers thought it was logical for our heroes to light a fire perimeter around Winterfell, and it was. They also realized that for the episode and the battle to not just end there, they needed the whites to get past the fire. So instead of following the rules of the series as laid out as recently as the previous episode, they instead decided to just say, screw it. Don't think about it, shut your brain off and enjoy it, they say. Well, I'm sorry, but logic is a thing that exists. If you don't want your series or film to be taken seriously, that's one thing. But this is a show that prided itself on being grounded and realistic, and now you want me to switch my brain off? No, how about instead of asking me to turn my brain off, the writers of this garbage turn theirs back on? Here's an idea. Just moments ago it was established that individual flame arrows couldn't light the fire, because of the harsh winds brought on by the Night King and the army of the dead. So maybe, despite Melisandre lighting the fire, the Lord of Light is struggling to keep it aflame against the storm that has just arrived. And after a few moments, the fire goes out. You could even have Melisandre say to Jorah, or to someone, that the Lord of Light is struggling against the Great Other, and will not be able to hold him off for long. To add insult to the intellectual injury here, when the fire is lit, it is revealed that Jon Snow riding the dragon Rhaegal is literally right next to the perimeter, and could have lit it with a single blast of dragonfire. In fact, that was the original plan for Daenerys and Jon to light the fire if the forces were overwhelmed, and then protect Bran in the Godswood whilst awaiting the arrival of the Night King. We then see Arya fighting the whites on the walls of Winterfell, and I have to ask, when exactly did she become such a brilliant warrior? Her expertise is supposed to be as an assassin, right? And I have my issues with that given the training she actually received, but I'll get into that in my critiques of Season 5 and 6. But when exactly was she trained to fight as a soldier in an army? Arya then finds herself inside Winterfell, and despite being a badass and taking on multiple hordes of whites at the same time just moments ago, she is now tiptoeing around the library, which I could have sworn burned down in Season 1, afraid of making noise for fear of alerting them to her presence. Arya, you were just in the middle of a battlefield fighting dozens of them, and now you're scared? I think I know what happened here. Benioff and Weiss were likely worried that Arya would seem too powerful and it would dilute the tension, especially in her climactic scene with the Night King later. So they decided to go back on her character progression with this scene. They've actually done this several times this season, after inexplicably turning her into an emotionless psychopath in Season 7. They clearly realized that fans love Arya, and turning her into a robot takes away her endearing qualities. So they worked that back by giving her emotional scenes, such as being reunited with Jon. This scene was a way to make her seem vulnerable, so that it wouldn't seem like a guarantee that she would be able to kill the Night King later. It's all rather stupid and rushed, but that actually describes this entire season. So Arya, the Hound, and Beric Dondarrion are fighting through the castle when they begin to get overrun by the dead. Beric saves Arya from certain death with his flaming sword, and then uses his body as a makeshift barrier to allow Arya and the Hound to escape. He is stabbed several times, and is very subtly visualized as a religious symbol. Beric then catches up with Arya and the Hound, despite being stabbed several times, and they barricade themselves behind a door along with Melisandre. And before I get into how dumb the following scene is, let me explain how dumb the manner they arrived here was. Firstly, we are led to believe that Beric Dondarrion is capable of holding off an entire wave of the dead on his own, when the entire Unsullied army were struggling to do the same. I guess they should have had Beric training the Unsullied in the art of holding back the dead. Except if you look closely, you'll notice that he actually only holds back 2 whites. Secondly, the point of Beric holding back the dead, it seemed, was to allow Arya and the Hound to get a head start and escape, seemingly sacrificing himself in the process. And yet moments later, he's caught up to Arya and the Hound. How was he able to catch up to them when he had been stabbed several times and was literally the only thing holding back the dead? Remember, the whites are running as fast as they can to catch them, and somehow Beric is able to run off, catch up to Arya and the Hound, and create some distance between himself and the dead, all after being stabbed multiple times. In fact, given the fact that some of the dead have a head start on Beric, because he wasn't able to hold them all back, it seems his feat of catching up is even more miraculous, as he was able to catch up and get past the dead, and then catch up to Arya and the Hound. Beric then dies, and Melisandre explains that his purpose in being resurrected multiple times was to save Arya so that she could kill the Night King. This seems like an awkward retcon in order to give his deaths meaning, but it leaves several questions unanswered. The first would simply be, how do you know that? Melisandre hasn't exactly been 100% accurate with her predictions in the past. The second question is, why are you not resurrecting him again? It has been established that Melisandre has the power to resurrect people using the will of the Lord of Light, and clearly the Lord of Light has seen it fit to bring Beric back multiple times. So why not at least try and bring him back again? If his purpose really has been achieved, then it won't work. But again, I must ask, what if you are wrong? What if Beric has been brought back again and again because he is the one destined to defeat the Night King? You want to subvert expectations? How about having a relatively minor character whose defining trait is the fact that he has been resurrected multiple times using the power of the Lord of Light, be the one to fight and defeat the Night King? Almost no one would have seen that coming, and it actually would have made a certain type of sense. Arya's story has had no connection to the White Walker story at all, and yet Beric actually seems somewhat of a perfect fit into this story, given his repeated resurrections. With Beric now dead, Melisandre explains to Arya that she must kill the Night King. She repeats a prophecy she told Arya back in Season 3. Did you notice a subtle difference there? Let me play it again.
Brown eyes, green eyes, and blue eyes. Brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes.
In the original prophecy, blue eyes were mentioned second, and in the new variation, blue eyes are mentioned third, with more emphasis. This is to retroactively imply that Melisandre knew Arya would be the one to defeat the Night King and the army of the dead as far back as Season 3. This is a lie, or what's known as a retcon. There is a reason why Melisandre originally said blue eyes casually in the middle, instead of dramatically at the end as she does now. Because back then, she was talking about the eyes of the people on Arya's list of names she planned to kill. In this scene, they have tried to change the context of the prophecy to apply to the Night King. This is because even the writers know that Arya killing the Night King doesn't make much sense, as she has never even been so much as tangentially connected to the White Walker storyline. There have been many claims that this scene and the prophecy are a clue to the fact that Arya would be the one to kill the Night King, and many fans of the episode, and the decision for Arya to be the one to kill the Night King, have cited it as a defense of the scene. However, this is objectively not true, and the writers have admitted as much. They recently revealed that the decision for Arya to be the one to kill the Night King was made a few years ago, around Season 5 or 6. so it would be impossible for them to be leaving clues back in Season 3 if they hadn't even decided on this until Season 5. Also, the writers deciding this back in Season 5 is even more of an indictment on their writing, as since they had known this was the plan for the last 4 or 5 years, they should have been actively working on bridging Arya's story with the White Walker plot. Instead, Arya only found out about the White Walkers in Season 7, and it means that all of the scenes teasing a confrontation between Jon Snow and the Night King were a pointless red herring from the get-go. If the writers are to be believed that Arya killing the Night King was a plan since Season 5, then all of the time setting up Jon Snow versus the Night King was done deliberately to mislead the audience. Perhaps instead they could have spent that time in other ways. Maybe showing the Dornish plot, and the fans excited for it, the respect they deserved. Or perhaps they could have cleverly tied in Arya's training at the House of Black and White to be relevant to her being able to defeat the Army of the Dead. Something other than awkwardly shoehorning the character into the plot and having her be the one to resolve it without properly building towards it would have been preferable. Even the actress who plays Arya, Maisie Williams, spoke about the logic of Arya defeating the Night King over Jon.
Speaking to Entertainment Weekly, Maisie Williams explained that she didn't know it was her character Arya Stark who was going to kill the Night King until the table read. Also, because she was in the dark about it until then, everyone acted weird toward her. However, when she finally read it for the first time, she was conflicted. It was so unbelievably exciting, Williams told Entertainment Weekly, but I immediately thought that everybody would hate it, that Arya doesn't deserve it. The hardest thing in any series is when you build up a villain that's so impossible to defeat, and then you defeat them. It has to be intelligently done because otherwise people are like, well, the villain couldn't have been that bad when some 45-kilogram girl comes in and stabs him. You gotta make it cool. And then I told my boyfriend and he was like, should be Jon though, really, shouldn't it?
Jon Snow and Daenerys then have a dogfight with the Night King with their dragons. They all fly high and appear to be fighting each other in the night sky over Winterfell. I think this is what is supposed to be interpreted by the audience because I could barely make anything out. The shot was already incredibly dark, but then someone made the decision to add storm effects and the entire thing became borderline incomprehensible. So the Night King gets knocked off Viserion, somehow, I really couldn't tell, it was so dark, and Daenerys has him dead to rights. She roasts him with the dragon fire, and he just stands there and takes it. The fire has no effect, and he smirks at Daenerys for good measure. This show might actually be dumber than The Walking Dead at this point.
Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
These few seconds of screen time leave the viewer with so many questions. Firstly, the Night King makes no attempt to dodge Drogon's fire, so it's safe to assume that he knows the dragonfire won't do any damage to him. Okay. How? How does he know this?
Dragonfire will stop him?
I don't know. No one's ever tried.
The White Walkers have been gone for thousands of years. In fact, they've been gone for so long they've fallen into myth, with most people around the world waving them off as a northern conspiracy theory. And dragons have been gone for hundreds of years as well. So how could the Night King possibly know he was immune to dragonfire? Did he stick his hand in Viserion's mouth and make him breathe fire to test it out? He has no actual way of testing to see if he's immune. And even if he did, why would he? Would you really run the risk of ruining your plan that you've been building for thousands of years, just to test to see if you had immunity to something otherwise deadly? Remember, if he dies, so does his entire army. That would be like you thinking you have immunity to boiling water, so you stick your hand in a pot of boiling water to check. Or you thinking you have immunity to lava, so you jump into an active volcano just to be sure. It makes no sense. But that's just one angle. Think of this. Dragonfire doesn't kill him. It has no effect. He is literally able to laugh it off. It also has no effect on his armor or weapons, it seems. Damn, Theon and Jorah could have used some of that armor. So the Night King is immune to dragonfire. But Valyrian steel is deadly. One stab from a Valyrian steel dagger kills the Night King and destroys his entire army. Now why does this not make sense? Well, I'll give you a moment to think about it. Did you get it? That's right. Valyrian steel is unique because it is forged in dragonfire. So dragonfire, as in the fire from a literal dragon, will do nothing to the Night King, but a blade forged in dragonfire will kill him instantly. That is spectacularly stupid writing. Jon Snow then confronts the Night King on the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of fallen soldiers. This is it. The fight the series has been building to for 3 seasons. Finally, it's the battle between fire and ice personified. A man turned into ice versus a man resurrected by fire. And then the Night King raises the dead around them to fight Jon, allowing the Night King to escape as Jon is forced to fight them off. This makes a certain type of logical sense. However, it also denies the viewer the proper confrontation between Jon and the Night King. And that's not to say the show has to have this confrontational fight, but the showrunners are the ones that decided to tease this fight for 3 seasons. If they didn't want to have these 2 characters fight, perhaps they thought it was a touch too obvious, then why tease it in several scenes over multiple seasons? This would be like Vince Gilligan teasing a face-off between Walter White and Gus Fring, and then it never happens. That would be absurd. If you don't want the confrontation to happen, why are you spending so much time setting it up? So Jon Snow fights off the Whites and starts heading to the Godswood to fight the Night King. This is a fight that never takes place. As he is heading there, he sees Sam, his best friend, swarmed by Whites. Sam is dead unless Jon saves him. And here we see one of the only truly decent moments in the episode. Jon pauses to look at Sam as he struggles to stay alive, and then he chooses to continue on towards the Night King. He wants to save his friend, but he knows that defeating the Night King is more important, and so he marches on. This is a really great character beat for Jon, and is made all the more important given that Sam is brutally killed mere moments later. Oh, wait, no, the show just cuts away. And when we cut back to Sam, he is fine. There are no Whites swarming him. He is alive and well with barely a scratch. It is some of the laziest writing and filmmaking in the entire show. The plot armor for these characters is now at laughable levels. As Jon is then headed to the Godswood, he is confronted by the undead dragon Viserion, blocking his path. Jon is unable to continue past the dragon, and just narrowly escapes death by dragonfire by hiding behind a large rock, which is presumably rubble from the dragon's earlier attack on the castle walls. Okay, let's pause here. So you mean to tell me that Viserion's fire is strong enough to destroy the walls of Winterfell, strong enough to destroy an entire section of the wall at Eastwatch, but is unable to destroy a small rock whilst Jon Snow is hiding behind it? This is the very definition of bad writing and plot armor. Jon isn't going to die here. The writers have plans for him throughout the rest of the series. But they have also decided that Arya is going to be the one to defeat the Night King, so Jon can't be allowed to make it to the Godswood. But also can't be killed, so he is confronted by a dragon. And instead of writing an exciting and interesting scene where Jon is forced to use his cunning to outwit and defeat an undead dragon, he just hides behind a rock. A rock that shouldn't be able to protect him, given what the show and even the current episode has previously established about Viserion's fire. I guess Viserion just forgot he could destroy things. This is a prime example of where objectivity is important. As a viewer and fan of the series, you may think this is a good scene. Perhaps you enjoy the visual splendor, perhaps you thought the scene was incredibly tense. But objectively, this is bad writing. The scene contradicts a previously established rule in the series. For the sake of saving the life of a character, the show isn't done with yet. The only other thing Jon Snow accomplishes in this episode is to inexplicably stand up and autistically screech at Viserion just moments before Arya kills the Night King, simultaneously killing Viserion in the process. So Jorah hears Daenerys' dragon in the sky, and telepathically knows that she is in trouble. Or that she will be in trouble in a minute. I don't know. On the grand scale of things, this is a relatively minor quibble, but honestly, this episode makes such little sense that the big issues are almost covering up the smaller ones. So for no apparent reason, Daenerys lands Drogon in the middle of the battlefield because she's a moron. There is no other explanation for this. She is just stupid. Remember when I said the writers had to cripple our heroes with stupidity in order to make this a fair fight? Well, this is a prime example. It's already been established in the episode that Dragonfire can easily wipe out entire sections of the army of the dead. But I guess Dany got tired and needed a break. So Drogon is quickly covered in whites, and Dany is knocked off of him as he tries to shake the whites off. Dany is now alone, unarmed, and unprotected on a battlefield covered in raging zombies, whose only goal, it seems, is to exterminate all life. She is absolutely a goner. The Night King arrives in the Godswood to confront Bran. Theon, out of arrows and surrounded by whites and White Walkers, takes his spear and charges the Night King, only for the Night King to snap the spear in half and stab Theon with it. Once again, armor is worthless in this universe, unless it is of the plot variety. Now let's pause here for a moment and talk about Theon. Many people said that at least Theon got a fitting death, redeeming himself for his past misdeeds and dying protecting Bran like a hero. If one was so inclined, one could say he had come full circle, as years ago he murdered 2 children and claimed they were Bran and Rickon, and now he has died protecting Bran. A fitting death then, it would seem. Well, I have to disagree. Theon may have sacrificed his life to protect Bran, but think of it this way. Theon died thinking he had failed. Theon died believing Bran was about to be killed by the Night King. Theon died moments before Arya would jump out of nowhere to save the day. I have a great deal of criticism about the setup of this episode and this season, and indeed the several seasons preceding this one, but let's assume everything up to this moment had to happen exactly like this, with the Night King stabbing and mortally wounding Theon. So how would I fix things to make Theon's death less disappointing and less inherently tragic? Well, it's really quite simple. Theon's death could have been much more fitting if he simply didn't die until after Arya had killed the Night King. Instead of dying immediately, the Night King could have recognized that Theon was bleeding to death and moved on to Bran. Then Arya does her thing, and Bran and Arya are able to speak to Theon before he dies. Bran could thank him for giving his life to save him, and Arya could call him a hero, claiming that she wouldn't have had time to save Bran if Theon hadn't sacrificed himself. Perhaps he could even survive long enough for Sansa to say goodbye, although that might be stretching things logically a bit. Although that's never stopped the show in the last few seasons. This is such a simple yet important change, it baffles me that the writers didn't think to make it. But then, that could be said for most of this episode, season, and frankly the show itself, or at least the second half of it. So the Night King is about to kill Bran, when suddenly, out of literal nowhere, Arya jumps in to save the day. And we need to pause again, as this entire sequence is cosmically stupid. Firstly, why on earth would the Night King risk everything, risk his plan that he's been working on for thousands of years, by risking his own life just to kill Bran? Why wouldn't he just have any one of his generals do it for him? Or he could have sent in the Whites to do it for him. They are all surrounding the Godswood at this very moment. Well, because we need Arya to kill him now, so that's why. But okay, he wants to do it himself. Convenient, sure, but maybe he has some master plan that will be revealed personally to Bran. Or maybe not. And then Arya jumps in from literally nowhere. And I'm not using literally wrong here. I don't mean figuratively nowhere. I mean so literally nowhere that they had to build a platform in the Godswood for Maisie Williams to jump off of. This shot right here shows definitively a lack of care for the product being created. I could understand if the Godswood had a sloping hill that she was going to jump from, and for safety reasons to protect the actress they built a platform instead. That would make sense. But no, the Godswood has no sloping hill. There's no rock or tree or horse that she's jumping from. She is literally just jumping in from nowhere. And the creators are clearly aware of this. That's why they built the platform. They were clearly aware that this made no sense, and they did it anyway. And the thing is, I can kind of understand the logic behind it. Let's say instead of her jumping in from above, she simply ran up behind him and stabbed him. Well, that wouldn't be quite as dramatic. Arya's entrance is shot this way to make it seem as epic and grand as possible. And I understand the instinct to do that. But in doing so, they sacrifice one of the most crucial elements to any scene. Logic.
Movies aren't about logic.
Shut the fuck up, you cunt!
Also, if Arya had just run up behind the Night King and stabbed him, we wouldn't have got the knife drop scene. And while some people likened it to the awful scene in The Last Jedi, where Rey does something similar, I think that is an understandable, if somewhat unfair comparison. At least when Arya did it, it made a certain kind of sense. Wow, I can't believe I'm defending the logic of this episode in comparison to something else. That shows just how broken The Last Jedi is. When Rey did it in The Last Jedi, it made no sense, as her weapon was the only thing saving her life. At least here, the Night King catches just one of her hands, which allows Arya to drop the dagger into the other hand for the kill. Now sure, the Night King could have just snapped her neck, I suppose, but that's not quite as egregious as the fact that Arya, supposed master assassin, screams out as she lunges at the Night King. No, wait, back up. How does Arya even get into the Godswood when it's surrounded by Whites and White Walkers? Wait, back up again. How does she make it across an entire battlefield mid-battle to even get to the Godswood in the first place? So Arya, who at this point somehow has the advantage of surprise, throws that away to scream loudly, alerting the Night King to her presence. It sure was good of all those White Walkers and Whites to stand perfectly still and just let her pass them, and for all of them to stay silent and not alert the Night King to her presence, and then to stay still and not try and kill her while the Night King has her caught. And it sure was nice of the Night King to not snap her neck instantly, or to not drop her as she tried to do the knife trick. Also, in episode 2 of this season, we see Arya practicing throwing knives. This is never brought back into the rest of the season, or the Battle of Westeros. At the climax of episode 3, when throwing the cat's paw dagger at the Night King, would have been the best logical chance of killing him, given that he was surrounded by guards, she decides instead to jump out of nowhere while screaming savagely. The lack of logic in this scene is compounding on itself, and the episode is thoroughly broken. Given that this is the climax of 8 seasons of build-up, one could argue that the lack of logic in this scene alone is enough to break the entire show. One could do that. Here, I'll do that. The show is broken. And then, like flicking a switch, 8 seasons of build-up, a story first teased in the very first scene of the very first episode of the show, is all flushed away.
Well, that's just fucking great!
The Night King dies from his stab wound by a blade forged in dragonfire. Not literal dragonfire, that did nothing, but a blade forged in dragonfire. Just thought I'd point that out again. With that, the Night King died, and with him, countless theories and ideas. There were many fan theories as to who or what the Night King was and what he wanted. Theories that Bran was actually the Night King, or that Jon Snow was actually Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, and came back from the dead in order to kill the Night King, a Fire White killing the ultimate Ice White. And yes, those theories may have sucked had they come to fruition. But you know what is worse than those theories? Doing nothing. The Night King just dying and leaving a myriad of unanswered questions in his wake is worse than those theories. Screenwriters and filmmakers posing a question to their audience and then getting mad when their audience demands an answer is a growing trend in Hollywood. I don't know if this comes from a sense of superiority from the writer towards the audience, an expectation that the viewers are dumb enough that they'll accept anything perhaps. It could be an intentional way of conveying contempt for the audience, or it could simply be a case of bad writing. Incompetence, laziness, or a lack of talent could all be the cause. Regardless, one thing is clear to me. You can't pose a question and then get mad when your audience wants an answer. So the Night King is dead, and there are a ton of unanswered questions left behind. Questions like, what was his goal? Why did he wait thousands of years to cross the wall? Did the wall have magical properties that prevented him from passing it? If he didn't have a dragon, what was his plan? Why did he risk his life and thousands of years old plan to kill Bran? Why was killing Bran a priority? How was he able to leave a mark on Bran? How was he immune to dragonfire but vulnerable to steel forged in dragonfire? Why would he risk dying by attacking a castle like Winterfell when he could just move his army past it? Is killing Bran his ultimate goal? If so, what would he do once he accomplished it? Would he just go back north? Why didn't he destroy most of Winterfell with Viserion before sending his army in to kill off whoever is left? How did a man getting stabbed with dragonglass turn him into the Night King? Was magic also used to create him? Is he vulnerable to magic? Could Bran have controlled him by walking into him? Why didn't he try that? The entire battle could have been avoided. If he is immune to dragonfire, why does he even need armor? If he is vulnerable to Valyrian steel, why doesn't he have much stronger armor? How is his armor impervious to dragonfire but vulnerable to Valyrian steel? Why doesn't he snap Arya's neck as soon as he catches her? Why didn't he send his generals to kill Bran, or his whites, instead of risking his own life to do it himself? What is the point of creating other White Walkers if killing the Night King destroys the entire army? We never see other White Walkers create whites, so what is their purpose? What is the land of always winter like? Why did the storm suddenly show up? Does the Night King control the weather? What other magical abilities does the Night King have? Is his goal to kill all of mankind? If his goal was to kill all of mankind, then what is his goal after he accomplishes this? Why does he smile after being roasted with dragonfire? A smile implies he has emotions and feelings, so does he? Is he actually more human than we've been led to believe? Why does the show spend so long building the Night King and his army up as a threat, only to kill them off in the very first battle? Is the Night King code for anticlimax? Okay, so now that we've gone through the entire episode, let's examine what the characters could have done to avert almost all of this from happening. Firstly, the fact that they line their soldiers up outside the walls of the castle makes absolutely no sense. The Unsullied, Dothraki, the Vale, who are still there by the way, and the Northerners should all be behind the walls of the castle. Now the perimeter of fire idea is a decent one, just not the way it was actually done. With everyone behind the walls of the castle, they should have spent all of their preparation time building a moat around the castle 2 or 3 times as big as they did, and then they should have lit it before the battle even begins. Instead of just standing around and waiting to die, they could surround the castle in fire. They know fire is one of the dead's weaknesses. They should have begun construction on this before Jon Snow even left Winterfell to go meet Daenerys in Season 7. When you spot the army marching on Winterfell, you light the perimeter. Also, you don't use Bran as bait in the Godswood. Who would do that? If you really want to use him to lure the Night King out, why not take him somewhere you have a direct advantage? Somewhere like Moat Cailin. It's been established that you can't just walk around Moat Cailin, you need passage through it. Hell, you could have moved the entire army there and wait for the dead to arrive and use your advantage to pick them off. But anyway, back to the battle. So I'd line the walls of the castle with archers. Despite the build-up of the threat, the army of the dead is actually pretty useless in siege warfare. They tend to mindlessly run at their targets, so just wait for them to charge at the castle. The fire perimeter will stop them, and the archers will now have a sea of sitting ducks to pick off from on high. Also, this episode establishes that one shot from Dragonfire wipes out a decent chunk of the dead. It's more effective than hand-to-hand combat could ever be. Let's assume from this shot that one blast of Dragonfire takes out 200 wights. And there are approximately 100,000 wights in the army of the dead. It would take 500 shots to wipe out the army. At about 5 seconds per shot, that's about 2,500 seconds, or about 40 minutes. Let's be generous and say it takes an hour. With 2 dragons, they could wipe out the entire army in 30 minutes, with the archers picking off whoever is left. Sure, that might not be as epic and spectacular, but then the spectacle shouldn't get in the way of logic. They should instead work hand in hand. The writers wrote themselves into this setup. If the logical conclusion isn't as epic and spectacular as you might want, the answer is not to simply throw out logic. The answer is to write a better setup. It gets even more absurd when you remember that Season 7 established that if a White Walker is killed, all the wights under his control are killed too. Daenerys and Jon could have just made a beeline to the back of the army and roasted every White Walker they saw. Remember, the Night King is the only one with a dragon. The rest are on horseback. There was a lot of debate about this episode and about subverted expectations. Some arguments against the criticisms were that it just wasn't what those complaining had wanted to happen, or that it was designed to subvert expectations. Well, allow me to retort. If the writers really wanted to subvert expectations, they could have subverted both the audience and their own characters simultaneously. How about this? The North prepares for battle exactly as I've just previously explained, only for the Night King to recognize that the battle is all but unwinnable and divert the army around Winterfell and continue to head south. The entire army passes by Winterfell without a single person dying. After the army has passed, there is a mass internal debate in the North on how to proceed. Jon and the like-minded want to warn the South and travel by ship to fight with them. Others want to build a new wall to separate the North from the South, to prevent the army from the dead ever returning to the North, and to leave the South to fend for themselves. The Night King's logic could be to bring the harsh winter with him, to leave those that retreat to the safety of their castles to freeze to death inside their walls. That could even be part of Jon Snow's argument.
My house has always said that winter is coming. Well, now winter is here. The army of the dead may have passed us by, but do any of you really think that will save us? They brought winter with them, and now it has come for all of us. Hiding in the north won't save you freezing within the walls of your castles. There is only one way to win, and that is to stand and fight together. For the first time, the North must sail south and fight as one. Stark, Targaryen, Baratheon, Lannister, it doesn't matter. The only line that matters is the line between the living and the dead. My queen.
Now I'll get more into how I'd have written the final season of this series in part 3 of this critique. However, I do have one more idea to posit to you about subverting expectations, while simultaneously calling back to Season 1, something the writers seem obsessed with in Season 8. How about this? The battle does take place, and the army of the living wins, just as shown in this episode. I mean, maybe not exactly as shown, as there are so many logical inconsistencies and contrivances in this episode, it's downright embarrassing, but let's say the battle is won, the day is saved, and Arya kills the White Walker in charge of the army of the dead that is attacking them. However, the Night King never shows up. Then in the distance, a dragon can be heard roaring. Jon turns to see both Drogon and Rhaegal perched on the walls of Winterfell, and then it dawns on Jon. The Night King has pulled a bait and switch, much like his brother Robb pulled on the Lannisters in Season 1. The battle, which claimed the lives of some and damn near destroyed those left standing, was just the beginning. This battle was a mere teaser of the war to come. The Night King sent in the equivalent of the Dothraki Charge, a group of fighters designed to be killed.
I wanted to see what you'd do, and you didn't disappoint. You let people die.
This was all just a distraction, allowing the rest of the army to pass Winterfell and head south. The Night King now has a one-day head start, with a healthy army moving south. There is no way Jon and Dany's armies can catch them on foot, and even if they could, they have been seriously depleted and are physically exhausted. The celebration was premature, and the battle must continue. After this, you could have the internal arguments between the Northern Lords on how to proceed, as I mentioned earlier. And I have other ideas for the rest of the season, but I'll delve into that all in much greater detail in part 3. And we have now come to the end of part 1 of my critique of Game of Thrones Season 8. Thank you all very much for watching. This quickly blew up into a much larger project than I had imagined, and it was necessary to split it up into parts. Part 2 will cover episodes 4 and 5, and then part 3 will cover the finale, the dangling plot threads, character arcs, and my ideas to fix this horrid mess. I don't have an exact timeline for when part 2 will be out. I hope to have it out in about a month. But really, it just comes down to how long it will take to write, record, and edit. I've started working on the script, but there is still quite a bit to do. But rest assured, it is coming. Until then, I'll see you in part 2.
The times when you get to be legitimately violent against women is one of the joys in life.
No e-girls, never!
Spaceman came down to answer some things. The world gathered round from paupers to kings. I'll answer your questions, I'll answer them true. I'll show you the way, you know what to do. Who is wrong and who is right? Yellow, brown, black or white? Spaceman, he answered, you no longer mind. I've opened your eyes, you're now colorblind. Racial, so...
I know a killer when I see one.
Well, no shit.